I often get asked the question, how long should a chapter be? And my standard answer is, as long as it needs to be. But that's not really a super useful answer. The reason why it's not useful is because the question isn't actually meaningful. How long should a chapter be is not relevant. What should go into a chapter? Now that's an important question. Generally, though by no means always, I like to include one scene per chapter, where a scene is the smallest part of a story that is meaningful to the overall narrative. So today, let's dive into the heart of storytelling and talk about the scene. Whether you're crafting an epic fantasy saga or a short story brimming with magic, understanding the anatomy and purpose of a scene is crucial to telling your story. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. Let's start with the basics. A scene is more than just a moment in your story. It is a building block of your narrative. In its simplest form, a scene is a unit of story where something happens. It's where your characters interact, conflicts arise, and the plot moves forward. But in fantasy, a scene can also be where your world breathes, where the setting itself becomes a character and the magic or mythos of your world unfolds. The very first thing to understand about a scene is this: every scene should begin with a hook. Now, this doesn't mean it needs to be a massive hook that's going to drag the reader into a cliffhanger. It's just something interesting, something to remind the reader where the story is and why they want to read this scene right now, as opposed to putting the book down for the evening and going to sleep. Example time. I picked a random chapter from Adrian Tchaikovsky's Empire in Black and Gold, and this was the first paragraph of that chapter. 2 lamps turned low lit the quartermaster's quarters, and the quartermaster had prudently agreed to absent himself. It was only a fraction after dusk when Thalric made his entrance, and yet there they were, already waiting for him. 4 of them, all Rakef, no doubt, though he only recognized the one. Immediately, as the reader, I'm interested, because why did Thalric need privacy? And who are the people that he's meeting with? As you can see, the hook isn't diving straight into the conflict of the scene. It's not some massive element that's going to immediately intrigue the reader. It's just something that makes the reader go, that's interesting. I wonder why that's so. And then the reader keeps reading. It asks the reader a question that they want to answer by reading further into the scene. And speaking of hooks, it's equally important that every scene should end with a hook as well as start with one. This does not mean leaving the scene unresolved, and see my video about why that kind of hook or bad cliffhanger actually turns the reader off reading. The kind of hook I'm talking about, the hook that takes the reader into the next scene, comes after the conflict or main action of the scene is resolved and leaves the reader with something to think about, a looming threat, a piece of unsolved mystery, or a character's unresolved emotional conflict. It's that tiny bit of temptation to turn the page and just check out maybe the start of the next chapter rather than switching off the light to go to bed. And of course, if they do flip the page, immediately they're confronted by the hook at the start of the next chapter. And then it's off to the races to see if you can keep the reader up all night and reading. Again, let's talk about an example. Here is the ending of the scene I used to demonstrate the starting hook. So this is the end of that same scene. Thalric had never scrupled about taking the Rekef's reputation by the hilt and using it. He never put that weapon down, though, without knowing that, the next time it was raised, it could be at his own throat. Why do I do this? The question surprised him, because he already knew the answer. He loved the Empire. Still, inside his head, where even the Rekef could not catch a treasonous thought, he wondered what sort of empire they were building, where even the watchmen must fear being watched. The scene has resolved. The conversations have been had. Thalric spoke to a superior and got his marching orders. Then, right at the close of the scene, we're left with this thematic gem of Thalric starting to doubt the Empire, starting to wonder if this is an organization that he wants to be part of, as his worldview crumbles a little. It's a great hook to keep the reader engaged with Thalric's storyline and reading on into the next scene. So your ending hook, again, doesn't need to be physical. It doesn't need to be intense. It can be emotional or even thematic, as long as it leaves the reader with that little wondering question. What happens next? Bear in mind, a good hook isn't just about making your reader turn the page. It's about sustaining the momentum of your narrative, ensuring that the reader's mind keeps returning to what's going on in your story and reminding them that they want to finish the book. Okay, I hope I've convinced you that a scene needs a hook at the start and at the end. But what goes in between these two bookends? Let's talk about the meat in the middle, the anatomy of a scene. There are 5 elements that should always be present in a scene. 1. The setting. Where does the scene take place? In fantasy, the setting can be as crucial as any character. Whether it's a dark, enchanted forest or a bustling marketplace in a city, the setting should enhance the mood and tone of your scene. And you want to establish at least something of the setting nice and early, so that the reader is grounded in the scene and doesn't suffer from white room syndrome, where they have no idea of what the setting of the scene looks like, and it is as though the characters are interacting with each other in a white room. Consider that example of Thalric entering the quartermaster's quarters again. We immediately get the sense of an office lit by lamps and that there are 4 other people. And that's enough. You don't need to spend paragraphs describing the setting. Just make sure that the reader has enough to be grounded in the scene. 2. Characters. Every scene needs characters. Who is in the scene? What are their goals? How do their personalities and desires clash or align? And very importantly, who is the protagonist in the scene? In other words, who wants something and is driving the story forward with their need? Are there antagonists in the scene? And these don't have to be villains. They can even be friends of the main character. But in this scene, they are preventing the protagonist from protagonisting, from getting their wants met. The antagonists then serve as the scene's obstacles to be overcome. But bear in mind, there doesn't have to be antagonists. The protagonists can be stopped from getting their needs met by the environment, or even by themselves through internal conflict or through thematic or philosophical conflicts within their own worldview. Let's check out a quick example from my own writing for conflict and character introduction. Louis eeled through a knot of shoppers, the spicy scent of fried onions tantalizing his taste buds. His belly reminded him that it had been a while since breakfast, but he ignored the faint pangs of hunger. He had a job to finish. The incomplete task lingered in his right pocket, a squishy reminder. But it would wait while he browsed the stalls. Before he completed his business in Lumios, he wanted to buy a gift for his daughter. Bright-coloured cloth awnings shaded the trestle tables of the vendors, their raucous calls and emotional bargaining points raising a clangor louder than a battlefield. The ripe fragrance of too many bodies packed together formed the undertone for every other scent in the square. This is the first 2 paragraphs from my first book, The Hidden Blade of Sangwell Chronicles, and it introduces the character of Louis as well as establishing the setting that he's in, the marketplace of Lumios, and it establishes what I hope is the hook, which is he has a job to do that involves something squishy in his right pocket. The squishy reminder of the task he has to do. As you can see, you don't need to go into reams of information about the setting or the character at this point. All you need is to give the reader enough to understand who is involved, where they are, and give them a reason to keep reading. And of course, this stuff is all subjective. So, what do you think about my opening 2 paragraphs? Does the hook raise your interest? Is the setting enough to get going with? Let me know in the comments below. And let's move on to thing number 3 a scene needs. Conflict. Conflict is the engine of your scene. Your scene's protagonist wants something and is driving toward that goal. What is stopping them from achieving that goal? Conflict doesn't always have to be physical. It could be internal or emotional or even ideological. And it should ideally tie back to the stakes of your story, as this is what keeps the tension going throughout the narrative. And of course, the stakes of your story should be physical, emotional, and philosophical or thematic if you prefer. But that's a story for another day. If you want me to discuss tension in stories and how you tie that into stakes, let me know in the comments below. Anyway, in that scene that we just opened with, that first scene of The Hidden Blade, the conflict of the scene is not actually Louis' task. He achieves that fairly easily in the opening paragraphs. The conflict is that Louis wants to go home. Louis wants to be at home with his daughter, and in order to achieve that, he needs to finish this task so that he can get home. And that's why mentioning his daughter up front is also a hook for the deeper conflict of the scene. But the immediate hook for the reader is the task he needs to achieve. Anyway, conflict of a scene does need to be resolved. We don't want to leave our readers hanging, as I discussed in the earlier video. And so, the 4th element of a scene is resolution. Resolution is how the conflict of the scene is resolved. And bear in mind, it doesn't have to be a positive outcome for the protagonist. Maybe they fail and learn something new. Maybe they get derailed by what I call a bus scene. An example of this, and why I call it a bus scene, is from the 1998 film Meet Joe Black. In the very first scene, just about, the main character, a guy, has a meet-cute moment with a girl at the coffee shop. And you think as the viewer that you understand what's going on in the scene and what the conflict is. Then the main character leaves the coffee shop and gets hit by a bus. A bus scene resolves when something happens that renders the original conflict of the scene completely moot by overwhelming it with a new set of stakes, like a bus hitting your character when he's worried that he didn't get the cute girl's phone number in the coffee shop. But whether the resolution of the scene is positive, negative, or a bus, resolution does need to happen in the scene, hopefully followed by, or inclusive of, the hook. The bus could, after all, be the hook. And that's it, right? That's what goes into the making of a scene. Setting, characters, conflict, resolution. Sure. But there's one more element, and it's a doozy. Number 5. Every scene needs a purpose. A scene without purpose does nothing but weaken the story. It drags on the reader, leaving them wondering why you, the author, have wasted their time showing them the scene. For us as writers, every scene is a pretty little darling, the child of our heart. But for the reader, they want to get to the good red meat of the story, not the filler. So let's talk about what kind of purposes a scene can serve. 1. A scene can advance the plot. The scene should push the story forward. If your plot isn't moving, readers might start losing interest. Now, not all scenes have to advance the plot, but the majority of them should. Most of the scenes in your book should be pushing the plot forward. A scene can also develop characters. Use scenes to reveal new facets of your characters, show their strengths, their weaknesses, and how they react to challenges. A scene can also establish theme or philosophical stakes. Your scenes can subtly, or not so subtly, highlight the themes of your story, whether it's the struggle between good and evil, the corrupting nature of power, or the importance of loyalty. Themes give depth to your narrative. Consider again that closing hook of Thelric from Empire of Black and Gold. Thelric wondering about the morality of his actions is part of his theme in the tale, and that scene does a lot to advance the philosophical stakes of his character arc. In fantasy especially, a scene can also, build the world. Ideally, your scene should expand the reader's understanding of your world, introducing new locations, cultures, magic, or other fantastical elements. Let your world feel lived in and rich with history through your scenes. Every scene in your book should serve at least one, ideally more, of these purposes. If a scene doesn't meet any of them, if it doesn't give the reader any new information about the world, the stakes, the characters, or the plot, it needs to be cut. It's just filler. Be ruthless. Cut or rewrite filler scenes and make them serve a purpose. So, are filler scenes the only snag with writing scenes? No. There are 3 other pitfalls in scene design that you should be aware of before writing. So if you've enjoyed the video so far, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about the pitfalls in writing scenes. We've spoken about the biggest one, fillers, and the importance of killing your darlings. The next most often seen pitfall is overloading a scene with information. Especially in fantasy, the temptation to dump all of your world building in a scene can be strong. Resist. Focus on what is essential for the moment and let the rest of your world building unfold naturally. Only give the reader what they need to understand what is going on in this scene. And that also forms an ongoing hook as the reader keeps reading in order to understand your world better. Another problem with scenes is a lack of conflict. A scene without conflict is like a sword without a blade. It's missing the edge. Ensure that there's always some form of tension, even if it's subtle. And this doesn't mean there has to be a fight or that the character has to climb Mount Everest or something. Especially at the start of your book, keep the conflict low and build up to the higher peaks in the later chapters. And don't forget internal conflict here. Not all conflict needs to be external with a character struggling against an outside force. Some of the best conflict is when the character is fighting themselves to do the right thing. But whatever your conflict is, there has to be some conflict. Otherwise, the tension in your story slackens and the reader's attention starts to wander away from your book and to some other piece of entertainment. And speaking of tension, let's talk about the last pitfall: forgetting the stakes of your story. Every scene should remind the reader what is at stake in the story, whether it's the character's life, their emotional well-being, the fate of the world, or the character's internal ideology. The stakes keep your readers invested. And a well-crafted closing hook can reinforce these stakes, urging the reader to keep turning the pages. Remember, every scene is an opportunity to engage your readers and pull them deeper into your story. Don't waste it. And that's it. That's your guide to the anatomy and purpose of a scene in a fantasy book. And as for how long a chapter should be, as long as it needs to be to make sure that the scenes inside it all have a purpose, a starting hook, a setting, characters, conflict, a resolution, and a closing hook. In other words, a chapter is as long as it needs to be. If you like what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, check out my epic fantasy books or my sci-fi book or even my spicy books in the links down below. However, don't feel obligated to support the channel financially. You can also show your support just by watching another video. Since you enjoyed this one, maybe check out my video on creating antagonists in fantasy stories. And I will see you soon for another video from Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it.